Artwork, critiques, Photoshop files, and reference sheets are all available on my Patreon. Well, hello there guys and girls, I hope you're all doing well. My name's Mikey, welcome back to my room. It's time for another tutorial. And today we're going to be continuing on with our series of squish and skindentation lessons by taking a look at other ways that the soft bodies for your own anime and manga drawings can be squished under different pressures or pressed flat against surfaces, such as an anime girl who's leaning or pressed up against a glass or windowed surface, and how we can describe that using some basic shapes to keep things nice and simple while still ideally having stuff look correct. So if you're following along at home, I've got a scrap of paper here to rest my hand on, a super cheap disposable mechanical pencil as ever, you don't need to wait for the good stuff to crack on, and a number of sheets of paper laid down here to give myself a nice surface to work on. Now I'm going to go ahead and we're going to have a very rough, loose design going on just so that we can focus on the squishy parts today. So I do apologise if this is a little bit rough, but as long as we get the idea across, hopefully we're going to be alright. And I'm going to give myself this massive flat surface. We can imagine this is going to be our window. And these might not be our final lines for this design, but it's a good starting point to give me a little bit of perspective and angle in order to make things interesting. And of course, if you're interested in a top-down perspective for looking at your characters at different angles, we've got one available just over here in some earlier tutorials. We're kind of putting together things that we've been covering before. And what I want to do is imagine that I've got an anime character up here who's being pressed up against the glass for whatever reason. Maybe she's just very excited about what's on the other side of this particular pane of glass or this window and just squeezed all up and against it for having a look. But also this is going to be very useful for maybe if you're describing your characters in showers and bathroom scenes as well. Really whatever your mind can come up with. Now the first thing I'm going to squish is going to be the face up against the glass side on. So I'm imagining that I've got my construction lines here for doing a very simple head where we have our sphere shape, just like so. And again, hopefully this is going to be these light guidelines which end up being firm enough for you guys to see. So I'm going to work a little bit more heavily than I usually do. And I'm going to just go here and bump out a little bit of cheek on this side before I sweep down to roughly where the jaw would be. And about halfway back across the center of the side of this head, I'm also going to imagine the sweep of the jaw coming in and down around about there, with even some ear up against this area. And before I start to put together the rest of the body shape for this particular character, I'm going to go ahead and imagine that center line now is going to bump all the way forward for vaguely a nose area before it sweeps back down. The nose projects out from the face, so if you already had your center line and your building blocks in place for your characters, you can move a few things around to just squeeze it all up nicely. But over here, I'm going to think about a surface area pressed against the glass that's going to map the side of the head. And I'm going to mark that out. So I'm going to go round here, up around this side, down towards the side of the face and the cheek area, and I'm going to squish in like this right into the cheek to imagine that this whole zone here is being pressed flat up against this glass surface and that the rest of the body is coming back and away from there. So we've got our first bit of squish, we've got some cheek pressed on sideways, and now I'm going to look down towards this body and start to make things taper away, and we'll have some other areas squished up against the glass as well. So I'm going to just have a neck that vaguely comes away around about here, heading off away from us. I'm just imagining a cylinder, but we're only seeing one part and the bottom area as it connects to the body. I'm still going to have a shoulder line right back over here, something like so, that helps me describe the top half of the torso. And although I like to use a big spherical egg shape to help with torso things, I'm also going to give myself a tiny quick rectangular box just to help myself with the distance and foreshortening, just as a very light guide. Don't worry too much about this, but I'm just going to pop a shape that comes away like that, so the bottom of this is further away from the glass surface than the top. And then now I can drop down and fill in that egg shape, knowing that this is vaguely the chest and rib cage area, sweeping back up and around like so. Something like that. And I might have the spine of this character sweeping all the way back down here and then shooting right off and back as that angle continues down and away, which means the hips area of this foreshortened shape are going to appear somewhere back behind everything else, like so. And the center line of this chest area is going to come down the neck, pop forward a little bit for where the collarbones are, sweep all the way down, and then become the tummy area, which is suddenly going to tuck in and under, disappear down towards the middle of the privates of the torso, vaguely a super shallow V that comes in there and there. But we're not going to see too much of this. This is just to help me understand the body construction being correct for the rest of everything else, which is probably going to cover all of this in front. So let's go back over here. I'm going to imagine we've got our shoulder circle, one just over here, and then another just over here somewhere as our guide. I'm going to sweep down for that collarbone action I was mentioning earlier. Let's go here, just a V, right down to that front line that sweeps back and up towards the top of the shoulders. We're going to see right across the back here and down here for this character. And I'm still going to imagine that we've got a line that sits on the chest below those shoulder circles, and that's where the chest and boob area is going to start from. But in this example, we're going to have things very squeezed as well. So I'm going to give myself two very generous elliptical shapes, which are going to be a little bit more taller than they are wide, to represent the idea that we've got some nice, soft, generous bosom being squeezed up against the glass for this character. I'm going to just drop one shape vaguely over here. Let's just firm that up just a little bit for you guys. And then a similar one I'm going to put a little bit lower, because when it comes to boobs being pressed against glass for various situations and circumstances, once they press in and squeeze, it's going to happen and stick into place wherever they happen to be sort of flopping or swinging around at any time. So you don't have to make it perfectly symmetrical, as long as the mass of the boobs, the amount of quantity that's getting squeezed, still looks relatively even. Now, this is just a guide for one idea of things. Obviously, there's all types of body types and all sorts of uneven and interesting boobs. Everything's valid, don't worry about it. But hopefully this guide's just going to help you understand how to construct them flattened against glass to really sell the idea that your characters are squishy and organic. So now I'm going to, just like this, imagine some flat areas. And because we're looking slightly down in this composition, I'm going to make sure that we're seeing a lot of the top of the boob that's not flat against the glass into this cleavage. And then the rest of a flattened area might be part of a sphere here. I'm going to sweep down just like this. And I'm going to let it meet right up against the other boob, as if to say these two are squished together in this action. Or coming back round about here. This one's a little bit lower, so I'm dropping this shape down as well. And bringing it back up over here, so that we're looking over the top. And again, I'm going to firm up this line quite a fair bit. And I'm rotating my pencil as I work, so that as I wear down the tip, by rotating it, I'm constantly working over a sharper, pointier bit of the lead to keep my lines crisp. When I'm sketching out ideas and having a think of things, I like to use a flat edge. And when I'm doing a lot of soft shading, I like the flat edge as well, because there's a lot of surface area. But it can mean your sketches get a little bit too feathery and experimental, which is fine unless you don't actually want that for what you're trying to teach in a particular lesson. So all of a sudden, I've got this nice flat feeling area here and right across there, while still having this construction here of a boob. And I'm going to just show that it's being squeezed flat back against the chest as well, by maybe just getting some crease shapes in there, as well as coming back around here and around there. Okay, so far so good. So how is she leaning against this? What's going on with body weight? I'm going to start with a hand sideways on against this glass, and I'm going to put it just around about here. What I'd recommend is, if you can, try having a look at any reference photos of where you've got people leaning against glass, wholesome reference photos, in particular the hands, because there's certain areas like the side of a hand where you might squish against a surface, or the flat of the hand, where a lot of the weight's going to be on the palm and the heel, or on the tips of the fingers. And that's what we're having a look at here. I'm keeping things as quick as possible, but it does mean it's a little bit rough, so there's no masterpieces. That's what I always like to say, just so that no one gets disappointed. But I'm imagining the side of the hand here getting squeezed up against that glass situation. Then maybe the fingers are coming down here, possibly even there, tucking in. I'll tidy these fingers up and get them looking nice and accurate in a little bit of time lapse in just a moment as well. But let's say this is our hand shape there and our thumb coming off round about here. I don't want to make the hand too large for our female characters. If you're drawing super strong female characters, you might want to give them larger hands, but even then, keeping them a little bit more scaled down is part of that effeminate visual language, even if they've got big arms and big shoulders. And then I'm going to have the rest of the forearm flat down here as well. So I'm going to drop straight down here. I'm following this line for no particular reason other than it's just conveniently in the same place. Don't worry, this is just our perspective loose guide. And then I'm going to bring that arm back down there to where it gets a bit wider, connects back in, round down there to the elbow, and comes back up this way to make its way into the shoulder there. And so I'm just going to think, right, if we've got the edge of our hand here flat against some glass, then the forearm and the meat and flesh of the forearm, it might not be a load. It's not as soft and malleable as a fatty mammary kind of structure as a booba, but it's also still going to be flattened a little bit with some weight behind it. So I'm going to map about this much of that forearm flat against the glass before we come away round about there. The elbow joint might just be popping away, not 100% flat against that surface as it goes back up around there. So hopefully these guides are just clear enough that you can still see what I'm up to. I'll certainly pop it in a little bit firmer in just a moment. And then over here, I'm going to do a similar thing, but let's have a look with a hand as mentioned. So I'm still remembering about my perspective. I'd love to draw a flat on hand, but I'm going to ever so slightly give myself some sort of starting square that's mapped to a similar perspective. And then I can start to think, right, let's vibe off with the thumb over here. Remember, we've got some how to draw hands and fists from basic shape tutorials. Also, we've covered this before. I'm going to have a thumb a little bit side on, squished up there. And then if I imagine that this is our palm area, like so, then the fingers are going to reach up at most a similar distance, something around about there. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to draw in these long egg oblong shapes about here, maybe here. Maybe I'll put the middle two fingers a little closer together, something like so, and then back around here for the little finger as well. And then I'm going to join these back in with some relatively straight lines to the hand area. What I'm trying to do here is show that these zones are where the tips of the fingers are pressing in. The thumb and side area is going to press. So let me just make sure that I'm using a nice sharp edge of my pencil here. And I'm going to map around here. And let's get the side of the thumb, a large amount of the palm over on the thumb side. Maybe a bit of pressure up on this side as well. So I'm just going to come a little bit more up here. This part of the hand, like so, down towards the heel, and I'm just going to put a nice firm bit, fingers pressing up against glass here, here, essentially just going around here and doing the circles that I've just put in before. Sometimes you can draw fingers by starting with the fingertips and working back to the palm or hand shape you've already designed. It really depends what you're trying to achieve with any hand design. There's so many different ways to go about it, and most of them are useful under different situations, so never feel too locked in. Now I'm just going to go back out on the right hand side of all of these shapes, just because of the angle that we're looking at. Just want to show that those fingers are pushing in the glass, like so, back out like there. and joining into the hand here, here, and here. Again, I'll tidy that up in just a moment. And then I can imagine that, okay, this arm might be just coming a bit out this way, away from us. And because this hand is flat on against the glass, the rest of the forearm, in this example at least, isn't pressing in quite the same manner as it comes away from us. Go down there, our joint's hidden from view here. And as we follow this boob line back up to this shoulder line, which then sweeps down from that circle, we can bring that back together with an arm as well. All of this relatively foreshortened away from us. Here's our surface curve, going down there, going down there as well. And then we've got the side of the ribs here, side of the body and the obliques disappearing down there and so on. And I'm going to add some legs to this character in just a moment as well. But now that we've got an idea for how to flatten things out, when it comes to shading these in, you might want to consider making these areas darker, because in this area, there might be a load of steamy shower water and a very hot, well-lit environment. Maybe the press of the glass is pressing out into a darker environment outside, and that means that it's going to be lit a little bit differently. This isn't catching any of the bounce light that's happening indoors. This is pressed up against the glass and being illuminated by what's on the other side. Not uncommon to make things a bit darker, but I'm going to worry about that in post because I want to crack on and talk about some other examples of water balloons as well. Now, we've covered water balloons getting squeezed when characters are perhaps holding them as well. And I just want to expand that with an example of when you've got a character who maybe has two water balloons whilst they're leaning back and we're looking down and squeezing those water balloons as part of a birthday party. Now, for YouTube reasons, I am absolutely only drawing a pair of hands squeezing water balloons. I have to make that very, very clear. Otherwise, this video will just randomly disappear and get taken down. But I'm just not afraid to teach you what needs to be taught. If you want to learn lots of different ways to draw, there's loads of tutorials on here made by amazing people who I admire. But there are a few things missing thanks to YouTube's policies. So thank you to all of you guys for clicking like or clicking subscribe and following along with the tutorials on the channel. I really do appreciate it. It's a great big help, really motivating to read your comments as well. And I'm just glad that you guys are trying to crack on with your own drawing journey. And we are here to learn how to make our anime and manga characters look attractive and alluring. We're not here to get too freaky about stuff, but there's plenty of basic things that you can just think about with your character design, which I think is always going to help. So when you have a character leaning back, and by the way, we've done a natural boobs tutorial as well. Again, the playlist is over here. Go check it out because we cover just a lot of mapping basics there. But if your character's leaning back and getting a double squeeze, let's have a really quick look at that. Now, I'm working across the shoulder line here. I'm imagining that this character's leaning back, so I'm already popping a little bit further up. I'm going to be very quick and rough, knowing that I'm going to really firm up this situation in just a moment. And I'm imagining that their whole chest area, as everything leans back away from us, something like this, which means their collarbone line is going to look relatively level from our perspective as we reach back up into the shoulders. And I'm also going to imagine that their hands are somewhere up here. Say they're lying back in bed and there's just a pair of water balloons just resting there on front of them. Now, I'm not going to bother about drawing these hands in now, but suffice it to say, I'm doing a couple of wedge shapes here and here, which I'm just going to imagine that there's fingers curling around and mapping into all of this like so. And I'm just thinking about that because maybe I want to have a bit of the arm coming down here, like so. Here's our elbow joint and the bottom part of the arm as it pops towards us before it meets back up into the body there. And it's doing a similar thing on this side here, because when you have a character who's got a very ample chest and they lie back, the organic nature of the boobs means that they spread out, often sideways in a very natural, organic manner. And in order to get some nice opportunities for squish, you might want to have your characters with their arms together, squeezing these boobs back into these water balloons back into place, or nearly. So I'm going to start off with imagining a pair of hands also pushing things up and in together. So very, very quickly, I'm just going to dive here and imagine, right, here's the palm or heel area of one hand. The back of the hand is coming over there, which means I might have a bit of thumb that's just disappearing off here and doing something. And then we might catch a bit of finger that's just squeezing up on that edge. So here's our wrist area, and then the rest of the arm going to disappear off away from us, like so. And then there might be a very similar thing just happening over this side. I've gone much further over this edge side, but again, that hand's coming up there. The rest of the situation, fingers squeezing things in over there. Here's our wrist, and then let's come away, cut that arm off around about there. And so if I was normally going to be drawing some very relaxed, large, generous shapes here, now I know that the pressure's coming in from the bottom and the sides, and so things are going to start to squish up and out. So they're going to squish upwards where there's least resistance, and maybe outwards as well. And I'm just going to simply bring a massive amount of this curve and this line sweep out past everything, going over the hand as well to show that this water balloon is squishing over the top area like this. And there's a lot of pressure from the palm or heel, so we might just curve back over that hand a little bit there before the rest of that water balloon naturally sinks down into this area here. And if there's two water balloons together, then this will be doing a similar thing where it's trying to just squeeze up and around, maybe even further out over this area before it comes back down and around and in. Honestly, just look at some real life water balloons. That's not a metaphor. They're a great example of seeing how organic shapes squeeze under pressure, and then maybe back up over this edge here. And where they squeeze together, I keep that line relatively straight because they both kind of have the same pressure against each other. So we've got two organic water balloon shapes coming round about here and up round about here if somebody's just reaching in and squeezing them for a party or something. And then we'll map the surface and just show where the notches of the water balloon are, where you tie the end seal on. Might just be something that's an X marks the spot situation, is probably the safest thing. Around about there to show that organic surface, squeezing around and in here, and then doing a very similar thing as it squeezes organically and pops back around here. Maybe the surface coming back around there as well, squeezing around there, lovely and soft, squeezing around here, lovely and soft. There's a lot of construction lines here. I'm going to get rid of them in just a moment. So let's drop into some time lapse. I'm going to continue giving some examples of some press, squeeze and squish, and we'll talk about them in just a moment. Hey there guys, and welcome back. So yeah, hopefully you can see now that we've firmed up this entire sheet. And by the way, if you'd like to grab a copy of all of this for your own artwork, as well as every single other sheet we've done in my tutorial series, you can grab that for just $1 over on Patreon, links below. Thank you very much for any support. And over here on this example, you can see how I've squeezed and squished everything flat for surfaces which otherwise might continue to curve. And how much we decide to flatten these things out, I've really clearly marked out these areas now, is going to tell the story of how much pressure and weight is leaning onto these surfaces and how organic and soft these areas otherwise might be. Some pads for the tips of the fingers, a little bit around the bottom of the palm, and of course if we've got some cleavage sticking together here, this whole surface flattened area can actually be one shape with no dividing line to really give the idea that things are mashing around. Now, I'm certainly going to darken up these areas for an image. In fact, you've probably already seen the thumbnail to this video, just to help clarify how you can change the lighting for areas of your characters that might be pressed up against glass. And over here, where we clearly have what is a pair of water balloons. As you can see here, I've got the knotted ends of these water balloons being squeezed from a POV perspective over somebody who might be laying back. These water balloons, when they're not supported by bras and so on, are organically sweeping outwards, out across either arm, and just following out the path of least resistance. So if we're going to give some pressure coming in from underneath on both hands to squeeze things together on these water balloons, you can start to see how these organic shapes deform, but still look very visually appealing. And again, what I've done here, as well as on this example of these two ladies here, just to give you an idea of how things can just squeeze in, is that where I've got things quite tight and facing towards us, I've actually gone very thin and very light with the dividing line, just again to sell that story of things smushing. Over here, I've just done it over the top of this boob area, as these boobs are getting pushed up and kind of resting down on top of these for a slightly taller female character against a slightly shorter one. And here I just wanted to give some examples of where we're mapping that flatness against a glass window, but also while still remembering what we've learned in our other squish and skindentation tutorials about things squeezing out the sides for tight materials and clothing. So guys, you've probably seen a load of names on screen just now. Those are, of course, my delicious patrons on Patreon. Links, of course, below. Again, they're the reason why I'm actually able to continue to make free drawing tutorials for you lovely people over on YouTube, because I just want to convince everybody to have a go at drawing. I love it. You might like it as well. I'd encourage you to pick up a pencil and see what you can do. Their support, and maybe yours, is what makes all of that possible. So guys, let me know what we're going to be drawing next time around. Get in the comments, and I'll see you then. Take care.